And I'm pleased to rise and speak again on this bill, Bill C-51, which is drawing to the conclusion of the parliamentary process. And I have had a lot of feedback from constituents in Vancouver Quadra. There's been positive feedback. There's been people who have said that the measured approach that the Liberals have taken gives them confidence that the Liberals are the only party that is really talking about both the importance of improving security measures for our country and talking about the importance of privacy and civil liberties and how that balance would go forward together hand in hand under a potential Liberal government. Others have communicated with me about their concerns about Bill C-51, and so I want to address those concerns. Mr. Speaker, before I go into that, though, I do want to say that this bill is a signature strategy of this Conservative government and this Prime Minister. And that strategy is to put some positive elements of public policy together with some negative elements of public policy, package those together in one bill for political reasons, for partisan reasons. The reason would be to make an effort to divide the progressive vote. This government wants to fragment the center-left voters for the purpose of holding on to power. That's the intention of their omnibus bills, Mr. Speaker. Putting positive elements in with a bill that has some very negative elements, forcing other parties to choose, apparently to reject the positive elements by voting against the bill because of its negative elements, or forcing a party to choose to accept unacceptable elements in order to signal support for the positive elements. This Conservative government has taken the view that bad public policy of packaging bills this way is worthwhile to pursue its own partisan interests for its own potential re-electability. And so I would say to any citizen who is following this debate, think very carefully about what the Conservative government and the Prime Minister is trying to do with this bill. What this Prime Minister wants you, the progressive voter, to do is to split the center-left vote so that this Prime Minister can be returned to power in the next election. And so think very carefully about whether you are falling into that trap, and whether your vote and your campaigns on this bill are exactly what was intended by this Prime Minister, for whom partisan gamesmanship always trumps good public policy. And I can think of several other bills that were this kind of packaging of positive elements with negative elements in order to jam opposition members, in order to be able to later say, you voted against this, that, and the other, should the opposition members decide not to support a bill because it has some landmines in it, some points really of bad public policy. So and one of the examples of that kind of tactic I would call the Internet snooping bill. This is the bill in which the Conservative Minister of the day stood up in this House and asserted that opposition members you're either with us or you're with the child pornographers. Well, that kind of approach didn't sit so well with the Canadian public. There was an outcry at that kind of partisan simplification, especially a bill such as that, which had some real weakening of Canadians' rights, and which eventually the government had to withdraw because of the outcry. The government has done the same thing with the cyberbullying bill, again packaging positive things, defending young people from cyberbullying, but also including attacks on their rights and privacy with respect to access to their internet and social media. In the first example that I gave, the internet snooping bill, the Liberals were positioned to vote against that bill. In the second case, with the cyberbullying bill, Liberals elected to vote for the bill because of the positive elements to protect young people from cyberbullying, although we were not in favor of some of the elements of enhanced access to Canadians' private information. So this bill, C-51, is part of that long lineage of bad public policy on the part of this government, shamelessly bad public policy in order to pursue partisan objectives. The Liberals are voting for this bill because of the positive elements, and we have laid out our amendments representing our concern about the undermining of charter rights and freedoms and privacy in Bill C-51. So let me first, permit me to reinforce that the Liberal Party of Canada is the party that brought in the first anti-terrorism legislation after the 9/11 attacks, and so we do support reasonable protections or reasonable provisions for our security services. The Liberals have been in government, unlike the NDP. So we have members who have been inside top security clearance and are aware that there are real security threats to Canadians, and that it is important for a government to respond to that. After all, it is a primary objective of any government to provide for the collective security of the members of its society. And the Liberals take that responsibility very seriously. While the Conservatives may inflate the true risks to members of our society here in Canada based on the instances of terrorist attack in last fall, there is some real changes to the threats to Canadians, and Liberals accept that. We acknowledge that, and we want to see security improve to reflect that. It used to be that a terrorism threat could be more like the one that occurred on 9/11, where there is an organized attempt to create damage here in our country. And that may still be a threat we need to, and that is still a threat we need to guard against. But in addition, through use of social media, through the kind of campaigns to radicalize young people that are being conducted by Daesh, or ISIS, that's a new channel for terrorist activity and threat. And so it is reasonable and appropriate. And actually, I would say it is necessary for government to respond and to reduce access to that channel. And that's what Bill C-51 does. That is why the Liberals are supporting this bill. The kinds of provisions that are being brought in by this bill include provisions that, should they have been in place last fall, could well have saved the life of Warrant Officer Patrice Vincent. So in thinking about how to respond to a bill that deliberately puts security improvements in a bill with other measures that are not respectful of the privacy and rights of Canadians, it's important to think about human life. The provisions for privacy, the provisions for human rights can be amended by a future government that acknowledges the importance of those principles. Clearly, this government does not, because they have never talked about this as a priority in any way. However, should someone die as a result of an incident that could have been prevented by improving security, that's something that can never be undone. Mr. Speaker. And so that's one reason we believe this bill should go forward. Now, the Liberals brought a number of amendments and to make this bill better and to address our concerns with respect to security and civil liberties. We are, after all, the party of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We are the party that brought that in and celebrated its 30th anniversary in 2012, unlike the Conservatives who refused to acknowledge the anniversary of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And what many citizens are not aware of is that the government did approve a number of amendments in response to issues raised by the public and by the Liberal Party of Canada. So the government removed the word lawful prior to the word advocacy and protest so that legitimate forms of demonstration are not captured by this legislation. The government's amendments narrowed the scope of information sharing from, in quote, with any person for any purpose, end quote, to 17 governments and departments and agencies, government departments and agencies, therefore restricting the possibility for abuse. And they amended this bill to limit and clarify the minister's intervention powers over Canadian Airlines. And furthermore, the government clarified in law that CSIS is not a police agency and has no power of arrest. So they've come part way towards the public and the Liberals' concerns about lack of protection of privacy and charter rights. These were necessary and welcome changes, but not enough, and additional changes are needed to protect citizens' right in privacy. Canada is the only nation of our kind without national security oversight being carried out by parliamentarians. And Canada's response to terrorism must also include a robust plan for preventing radicalization before it takes root. The current government has not adequately legislated transparency and accountability measures into this bill. And so the Liberal Party is committed to making those improvements. We are committed to providing national security oversight, not just for CSIS, but for the collection of government agencies and departments that have security and intelligence responsibilities. We are committed to bringing in a robust form of prevention so that young people, usually young men, but more and more young women who are at risk of being attracted to radical ideologies and promoting terrorism here at home, can actually have the support that's needed to change that pathway, engaging with rather than marginalizing communities. For example, the Muslim community is a very important objective of the Liberal Party, and our party has committed funds as well as a plan to strengthen protection and prevention of radicalization in Canada. Furthermore, the Liberal Party would sunset this entire bill in 3 years. So that will provide a time period to see which of the concerns that the public and the experts have are actually real concerns and which ones are theoretical. Within 3 years, there would be a full review of this bill under a Liberal government with improvements put in place as necessary. And I'd like to point out, Mr. Speaker, when the Liberals brought forward stronger security measures after 9/11, it was a completely different approach than the one taken by the Conservative government. It was an approach based on good public policy. It was an approach based on really addressing the weaknesses in the security regime in Canada, but working with members of the public and opposition to ensure that that balance with privacy and human rights and freedoms was protected. The government of the day, the Liberal government, had a robust set of committee hearings. I believe it was 19 separate days of hearings, and brought in a full set of amendments to reflect any concerns that were heard. That really contrasts directly with this government's approach of cutting off debate, of time allocation for for debate and for committee process, and essentially adopting a few amendments but ignoring others that are necessary changes. And so that's why the Liberal Party will campaign with a commitment to address the full range of concerns of experts and Canadians alike should we form government. What should be underpinning this kind of legislation, Mr. Speaker, is principle. And principles such as democracy and the role of the Canadian public in engaging in public policy changes that will affect them. That principle was not respected by this government's process. Humanity, thinking of the rights and freedoms of Canadian citizens. And this government is tipping the scales away from that principle. Which is part, and Mr. Speaker, that's part of a pattern with this government. Whether it is eliminating the mandatory long-form census, which provides real data on which to found public policy changes and address the human needs in our society, reflecting the needs of newcomers, of people of various cultures, religions, languages. The mandatory long-form census was an important tool that we no longer have. This government has muzzled scientists, the very people who provide evidence for how to move forward with good public policy to address the issues that face us as a society, for which the government has the responsibility to work with citizens and respond with law and policy to address the evidence. I'm pleased to say that it was a Liberal initiative to strengthen privacy and rights in a private member's bill, and that was my private member's bill called C-622. And I invite anyone following this debate to go to my website and find the material on Bill C-622. It was a bill that was, timing was coincided with the attacks last fall in October, and so not surprisingly, it did not receive the support needed to pass. But I will acknowledge the opposition members for having supported this bill. One Conservative member supported it as well, but the rest of the Conservatives did not. It was a bill that was intended to increase the accountability and transparency of our National Signals Intelligence Agency, CSE. Bill 622 was developed in concert with the very experts who have been providing commentary in committee on Bill C-51. So I had the privilege of working for a number of months with experts in security, in the Canadian Armed Forces, in the intelligence community, in the privacy community to develop Bill C-622. And I'm grateful for the support that I received by all of the Liberal members in this House. That bill, C-622, would have taken away the minister's power to secretly authorize the interception of Canadians' protected information, including metadata. It would have placed the authority in the hands of an independent judge of the court. It would have strengthened accountability and transparency internally of CSE, established new requirements, a new mandate for the commissioner, and amongst a list of improvements for privacy and rights. It would have established a national committee, the Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament, to oversee our security departments and agencies. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are the only party committed to both strengthening security provisions as needed as the world changes around us, and protecting and enhancing privacy rights and charter rights of Canadians. And so I invite those members of the public concerned about this bill to look at the Liberals' record and the reasons for supporting Bill C-51 so that we can prevent the death of a Patrice Vincent in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.